Welcome, everybody out there to Don't Pick the Scab podcast, episode 51. We have Jonathan Steele on the podcast. He's my first returning guest, and that is an honor. You're the first one. This is a podcast for men over 40, either starting in the middle or one and done with their divorce journey. Present some of the tips, tricks, and methods for you to heal and move on with your new life. I think Jonathan's first podcast was 43, and I think the title is Your Lawyer's Not Your Counselor. One of those things.
Life coach.
Yeah, life coach. Yeah. So went from there. And then we touched on the end about cybersecurity. And man, you guys reached out to you about cybersecurity like crazy. Welcome to the Don't Pick the Scab podcast with the premise of connecting men over 40 with the tools and community to thrive in their divorce recovery, either before, during, or after a divorce. So this one, we're talking about cybersecurity, and we're going to get after it. So my first question is, basically, can you explain the role of cybersecurity in divorce proceedings and how it can impact your outcome?
Yeah, like any facet of your life, cybersecurity can play an important role, particularly in litigation and in family law and divorce. Having a managed cyber posture goes a long way towards keeping your trial clean, keeping yourself in a good light with the court. So it's important to keep control over who you're connected to on social media, what you're posting, rein in your permissions across the board on your devices, and then keep your accounts secure.
We just had this is ironic because on the other podcast, Divorce Over podcast, Rachel and I talked about social media and presence and first starting divorce. And hers was ease up a little bit. But mine was get off, because social media becomes a negative thing sometimes with divorce. So what do you think about that?
It's more often negative than it is positive. There are so many cases where something that you've posted, somebody that you've friended, comes back to bite you. So whether you're seeking alimony or maintenance and you lose that because you're posting on social media that you're cohabitating with someone else, or you're wasting money as evidenced by with the lavish vacation photos that you're posting.
Going to Florida.
Things like that. That has a tendency to pop up in your divorce case, whether it's that or whether it's just your connections to a paramour or whatever it may be. I rarely, if ever, see a good application of social media in a divorce case.
Let's talk about cybersecurity threats. It's almost when people go through a divorce, like they don't pay attention to their passwords, whatever. Do you see like an increase of people getting stung or popped like that?
I see an increase across the board, and that's going to include people from divorce. In general, phishing attacks are on the rise. Email compromise is on the rise. Business impersonation emails on the rise. And that's just going to keep growing. It's going to keep getting worse. It's going to keep getting more prevalent. AI is making phishing emails harder to spot.
You beat me to my question, but go ahead.
All right, I'll pause that. I'll let you ask.
Oh, yeah, but go ahead. Yeah, so what about the AI component? I've seen where people can replicate faces. They can replicate voices. It's just, you almost need to have a safe word, like a family safe word in order to do things.
Yeah, what you're touching on is deep fakes, and that's a scary application of AI. And like any tool, there's a good use and there's a nefarious use. And the good use is using AI to power firewalls and threat detection. But in the not too long ago days, phishing emails were easy enough to spot because you don't have a Nigerian prince cousin that needs you to wire $400,000 now. And they didn't email you with broken English that was really easy to detect. But now somebody that wants to phish you puts their broken English, confusing narrative into ChatGPT and just says, clean this up. And now what they're sending looks legitimate. It's much, much harder to detect.
Wow. So how can people protect themselves? What are some of the ways? I see they have LifeLock. That's a big one. Is that worth the money? People don't know about that.
Generally, no. I don't view it as being worth the money just because it's reactive. So I would rather prevent harm than have somebody
Hmm.
tell me after the fact harm has been caused to you. And when you reference LifeLock, what you're trying to do is protect yourself or notify yourself of new lines of credit or things like that that have been opened on your credit reports. And you can proactively prevent that by freezing your credit for free with each of the three major credit bureaus. Then you're going to prevent it, and then you don't have any need for notice after the fact.
Gotcha. What advice do you have for the men over 40 who suspect their ex or their soon to be ex partner is monitoring their online activities?
It's quite possible. It's easier said than done to do that, but you have to triage how you go about sleeping at night. The first and most important thing is to make sure that your communications with your lawyer are secure. If your spouse is reading your emails with your lawyer, you've got a problem. And there are more secure email providers out there like Tuda and Proton Mail that are really cybersecurity focused, privacy focused. They do a great job of helping navigate landing in a place that's more secure.
Hmm.
But even if you're not sold, even if you want to stay with Gmail, you can just button up your Gmail account. You can use a better form of multi-factor authentication to keep your spouse out of your emails. You can change your password. You touched on that earlier about basically sloppy password practices. So get a password manager, use unique, random, long passwords or passphrases for each of your accounts. That's going to go a long way. And then use multi-factor authentication everywhere. Use it with your banks, use it with
Okay.
your emails, anywhere that it's offered. Yeah, it's going to add a little bit of friction. It's going to irritate you a little bit having to type in a 6-digit code, but the cleanup on the back end
Oh
is
my
far
God.
more irritating.
Yeah. Last time we talked about buzzwords, and I think the buzzword was, what is that word? God, I can't remember. Anyway, so one of the new buzzwords for me in cybersecurity is digital asset management. How can you discuss the importance of digital asset management in divorce, and what should men over 40 consider?
I guess it depends on what kind of assets it is that you are trying to protect in your divorce. If we're talking just generic terms like your financial assets, your
Hmm.
cryptocurrency, your bank accounts, that's the same sort of advice where it's use a unique, strong password for all of your bank accounts, all of your investment accounts. And then if you want to go a step farther, maybe you want to look for a bank that's more cybersecurity focused. So places like Chase, Bank of America, they're going to offer you, for the most part, SMS based or text
Hmm.
message based multi-factor authentication. And that form is susceptible to what's called a SIM swap attack. And so it's not great. It's better than nothing. But there are better forms of multi-factor authentication. For instance, if you go to an investment bank like Morgan Stanley and you open an account that has a checking account component to it, they'll offer you the ability of having a hardware security key as your
Okay.
form of multi-factor authentication, and that can't be phished. So either you have the key in your physical possession or you don't. And if you don't, you're not getting into the account. So that goes a long way. Anywhere you can use a hardware security key, you're better off using that.
Let's talk about encryption. That's a big one, and that's part of the security key. What role does encryption play in protecting sensitive communications during a divorce?
It's pivotal. It's required everywhere. You should be having end-to-end encrypted communications with everybody if you can, but at a bare minimum, your lawyer, your accountant, anybody important, your insurance broker, anywhere you can use actual end-to-end encryption, you should be using it. Anytime you're storing data, whether it's your tax
Hmm.
returns, your bank statements, your insurance statements, your health records, that needs to be encrypted. And most cloud providers, most email providers, there's some form of encryption. If you're using Gmail, which is the most common, your email inbox is encrypted. When you send an email from your account to someone else's account, it's encrypted in transit. The distinction that I'm making with end-to-end encryption is basically a privacy thing. With Gmail, yeah, it's encrypted. anyone outside of Gmail is going to have a pretty hard time decrypting your mailbox and reading your emails. But Gmail has a key. And so they're like your landlord. They can come in and they can read your data and they can do with it what they want. They can market to you. They can profile you based on your shopping receipts that are in your inbox. And that's why I try to push people more towards a Tuda or a Proton Mail, because those operate on zero access encryption on your inbox. And they also offer end-to-end encryption, which if you're emailing from Proton to Proton, that's end-to-end encrypted. Nobody other than the recipient can read your email. But even outside of that benefit, all of your shopping receipts, your Expedia confirmations, all of your Amazon receipts, your DoorDash receipts, all of that, once it lands in your inbox, is encrypted to the point where even if Proton Mail or Tutanota wanted to, they could not access your emails. They can't produce them responsive to a subpoena because they have zero access encryption. And the same goes for cloud providers, cloud storage. It's the same sort of situation when you look at Google Drive versus the Proton Drive. I have a tendency to shy away from Google. That's probably not a secret at this point, but they do a good job when it comes to security. They do a good job of protecting your account. They're just not very privacy respecting. They openly advertise based on the content of your emails, and they market to you and they build profiles. That makes me uncomfortable, but a lot of people don't mind it. And so it's okay when it comes to just security alone.
Oh, that's interesting. How can someone recover from identity theft since it happens so often? And how can, let's say, two people are going through a divorce and there's identity theft? How does that turn the divorce topsy-turvy? What's some of the things that can happen?
The recovering from identity theft is tough. And that's why you have to look at it proactively, because that cleanup that I mentioned earlier is so much harder than just a couple preventative steps on the front end. Once your information is out there, good luck getting it back. Once your social security number is leaked, good luck getting it back. It's almost impossible to undo a lot of the harm. You can try to mitigate the damage. You can try to open or set up fraud alerts on your credit reports. You can try, if you had a LifeLock, they'll help navigate that process of cleanup. They'll offer you some levels of insurance in certain situations. But the cleanup of identity theft, it's tough. One of the first things you're going to want to do is freeze your credit to prevent further harm. But it's very difficult. You'd be well served to do all you can do to prevent that from happening in the first place. And if it does happen, I'm sorry that it happened, but freeze your credit.
Ouch.
Monitor your credit. Look for any signs of breach and do the best you can trying to clean up the harm.
How do you advise clients on the use of apps and online services for co-parenting? That's a big thing that wasn't around when I got divorced, because I'm an old guy. And are there security concerns with those?
Yeah, so at least here in Illinois, there's a couple. There's Talking Parents, and then there's Our Family Wizard. That's the pretty popular one, is Our Family Wizard. I like the apps. They're convenient. They do a good job of scheduling things and exchanging expenses. And Our Family Wizard even has something called a tone meter, where if you write something and it's snarky,
Seriously,
it'll tell you this is snarky, or something like that. And that's pretty important in a lot of my cases, because people have a hard time filtering themselves. But like any other app, it's important just to keep the permissions in check. Right? If you have an iPhone, it does a good job of telling you these are the permissions that you've granted to the app. And some are probably unavoidable, but some might not be. If you have a calculator app on your phone, does it need location permission? Does it need access to your local network? Does it need Bluetooth? The answer is probably no to all of those. So I would just try to be mindful of what permissions you've given to the app. I don't know for sure whether every feature of Our Family Wizard is required to have location access, but if you can get away with having it off, I would have it off, just because I don't like apps knowing where I am, where I'm going, where I'm spending time, how much time I'm spending there. So I would just try to be mindful of location. And then also, I know some of these apps have like a document sharing feature where you can, share bills and share report cards and schedules and things like that. So I would just try to be mindful of metadata that's going along with the documents that you're sharing. Hopefully and this may not be the case. The apps are stripping the metadata before they're sharing what you're uploading, and they may not be. And sometimes the metadata that goes along with a file tells more about the story than the file itself. That's more so the case usually with photos. When you upload a photo or you email a photo to someone, it usually has the GPS coordinates that the photo was taken, the time, the date, the kind of camera, the kind of phone, a lot of information that you may not know is going along with that picture. So I would just try to be mindful of, is there metadata that's being sent with whatever documents I'm trying to send? And sometimes you can remove it. Sometimes you can alter it if it's appropriate to do that. So I would try to be mindful of that.
Let's do some positivity, man. It hasn't been negative, but it's been, let's get some positivity going on. What new and emerging cybersecurity trends should individuals going through a divorce be aware of? What's coming down the pipe? What have you heard?
I'm seeing just more frequent and more difficult to detect of the same. I'm not seeing a ton of new attacks or new breed of attack. I'm just seeing more frequent phishing, more frequent business email compromise. And depending on where you work, that one in particular can be rather concerning. You can get an email that looks like it's from your boss that's asking you to do something now, and they're preying on psychology. They're preying on, this is urgent, I need to act now.
Small businesses. Yeah,
that's a real concern. And sometimes there are good indicators of that. If you look at the email sender, not just the name of the sender, but the actual address. American Express isn't emailing you from a Gmail account. Your bank is not emailing you from an Outlook account. They're going to use their own domain name. And so you want to check that. You want to slow down, because most of the things that you're going to be asked to do aren't now. So it's rare that your boss is going to email you and say, I know I've never asked you to do this before, but I need you to wire me money right now. So there's two things there. One is confirm with the sender of the email by an alternative means. So if you get an email that looks like it's from your boss, it's hard to tell, call your boss. You're not going to inconvenience them. They're going to appreciate the diligence in confirming before you do something silly. And then just stop and pause and think, maybe get up from your desk, do a lap around the office and come back. And during that time, maybe you've thought, gee, this just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I've never been asked to wire money before. It's hard sometimes, depending on the line of work you're in. There's not always the luxury of time. Certainly as a lawyer, it's fast paced. You're making decisions quickly. So it's hard sometimes to slow down and think, but it's important. So
I got a story for you. A couple of years ago, my dental software went down. So I was on the phone with tech support, and it's one of the top 2 dental software programs. So they're pretty big. And so I was on the phone with this lady, and so she was helping me out. She took control of the computer and did her thing. And so we're sitting there. I said, hey, can you tell me, because I'm a big backup guy. I back up every day. So I said, can you tell me what's the longest amount of time that you had to help a dentist go back and back up? You know what she said? 6 months. So we had to re-enter every entry from 6 months ago.
That sounds wildly inconvenient.
So can you tell the listeners out there how important it is to back up every day?
It's vital. There's a lot of software out there that automates it for you, so it's not something that you need to manually do every day. I back up multiple times a day, and it's important because ransomware happens, and it can put you out of business. And if you have backups, that might save you in that situation. So backups are vital. Testing your backups to make sure that you can actually recover from them is vital. And then having a good backup strategy is also important. There's this 3-2-1 mantra that you should have 3 copies of your data in 2 locations or 2 mediums. At least have an offsite backup, have a cloud backup, or have a physical backup like on a disk or a USB drive that you keep in a safe somewhere, because one of these methods goes down and then you have nothing. So one form of backup is about the same as having 0. So it's important to have multiple forms and to also test your ability to recover, because some people, they think I've been backing up, I'm good to go. And then disaster hits and they go to restore from their backup and they realize that then, wait a minute, I have all these backups, I can't do anything with them. It's important to test that.
Yeah. What's the deal? Because I have fiber here. We got fiber probably 6 months ago. A lot of these Comcast, CenturyStink, because I hate CenturyStink, they promote all sorts of software that they have to prevent phishing. How reliable is that? These guys always say that.
I haven't seen Comcast promoting that, but it doesn't surprise me. Everybody's jumping up trying to seize on people's fear, and the stories that you're seeing in the news is happening all the time. There are certain forms of software that the problem is that there's a new phishing site that pops up every day. And so unless these software or these services are somehow keeping track of emerging phishing sites, it might protect you from a phishing site that went down 6 months ago, but not one that went up today. There's certain firewalls, there's certain DNS providers that use AI algorithms to stop you from hurting yourself, basically, and clicking a phishing link. And there's certain endpoint protection that can do that on your devices. But all of those are hamstrung by what it has seen before. So the problem is just if you put up a new phishing site today, most of the software hasn't seen it before and it won't know to block it.
What about getting things like McAfee or Norton? How reliable is that? Do you suggest someone get something?
Yeah, it depends on what kind of device you're using. If you're using a Windows device, those are pretty vulnerable. Those are pretty commonly attacked just because of the market share. They're very prevalent devices. Nowadays, Microsoft Defender does a pretty good job on its own, and maybe you don't even need to supplement. If you're on a Mac, those are pretty secure right out of the box. Apple does a pretty good job. They have complete control over their hardware. They only allow certain kinds of apps on certain kinds of devices. Maybe on a Mac, you don't need one. But it also depends on your threat model, what it is you're doing with your device. If you're downloading illegal movies and downloading illegal software from shady websites, then you probably do want to have some form of antivirus because you're going to come across some shady practices. But if you're not doing that and you're just sending emails, maybe it's not necessary, but it can't hurt. It really doesn't slow down a modern machine very much. They're not very expensive. To the extent it gives you peace of mind, maybe it's worth it.
Can you explain the concept of digital footprints and how they affect divorce cases?
Yeah, your digital footprint is unavoidable no matter how good your OPSEC is, no matter how good your cyber hygiene is. You're making a digital footprint every time you open your browser, every time you're doing anything on the internet. The more exposure you have, the more social media accounts, Instagram, Twitter, Mastodon, Facebook, all of those are expanding your digital footprint. And you can't really shrink it other than to delete your accounts, make them private, prune your friends list. Certainly in the context of a divorce and elsewhere, your digital footprint is definitely something you need to be mindful of and keeping it as small and as tight as possible. Part of what I consider to be your digital footprint is made worse by data brokers now, that if you hop on Google and you put somebody's name in, that's probably going to pop up the first 10, 15 links, their home address, the name of their spouse, their phone number, their email address, and it's all just publicly available information. And that makes you an easier phishing target. If somebody can call you on your phone and reference your spouse's name and reference your city that you live in or spoof an area code so that it looks like it's coming from your neighborhood, that's all the easier to phish you. Whereas if somebody's just completely blind about any information about you, you're going to be a little bit harder to phish. And so there are certain services that you can subscribe to clean up your digital footprint a little bit. They can remove some of your data from these data brokers. Services like Delete Me do a good job of automating removal requests, data removal requests on your behalf. They don't do anything that you can't do yourself. There's a way of requesting removal from each data broker manually. The problem is there are hundreds of them and it's time consuming. And once they're removed, they might repost that same information 2-3 months later because they've scraped it from somewhere else and they've reposted it. If you subscribe to Delete Me, you pay an annual fee, and they quarterly go and search for your information. If they see it, they automatically submit new removal requests. So if you value your time at all, it's worth subscribing and not trying to do that manually.
Man, what is your perspective on the future of cybersecurity and family law? How do you see it evolving, positive and negatively?
I'm trying to be more positive because you touched on a negative tone there, but it's hard to be positive about the impact. It's just going to keep increasing. That intersection between the two is just going to keep increasing. Nowadays, most court appearances are on Zoom, so you're opening the door to more digital attack surfaces. To your point about deep fakes, that's scary. That's scary stuff. If you can use an AI model to have your spouse doing something, saying something that they didn't say, that they didn't do, and you're using it as evidence, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a hard thing to prove. And lawyers just, for the most part, aren't equipped to try to prove that, to try to dig into that, because most people aren't. The intersection is just going to keep growing. It's going to keep getting worse in terms of the risks of cyber breach, cyber attack. I think it already intersects in certain areas like orders of protection, custody cases, but I think it's just going to continue to increase.
Yeah. All right, sir. That was pretty good. I'm going to drop some knowledge, not knowledge, but one of my things is I always tell my friends and my family that every computer is built to fail.
That's probably true.
And they say, so tell the people out there where to find you. We didn't talk about any law, but that was good, man. That was awesome. Tell the people out there where to find you.
Sure. I've got a website, steelefortress.com. That's got all my contact information. So that would be a good place to look for me.
So is there I know there is the ABA and all these law organizations. Is there a law cybersecurity organization yet?
Not that I'm aware of.
Dude, you could be the first. You could be it.
I've been hearing a lot lately that I'm just like a very unique person that people just, it's not a very common intersection. Lawyers just aren't trained in security, and security people aren't trained in law. So it's a unique intersection.
All right, Jonathan, hold on the line here. But thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you taking time at 5:30. And thank you for being my first second guest.
Thanks for having me.
That was awesome.